right, let's talk about the faulty appeal to authority. This is when we appeal to someone that we think can be used as an authority in some area, but they're really not an authority. All right, sometimes we do this and don't even think about what we're actually saying or who we're referring to as an authority. The faulty appeal to authority, according to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is appealing to authority as a reason to believe something is fallacious whenever the authority appealed to is not really an authority in the subject matter or that particular subject. I think I did some videos on dealing with authority or how to understand or rank who is and is not an authority. I'll go back and check, and if not, I'll have to make a video on how to determine whether or not a person is an authority. But an easy one would be when you think of how much you depend on advice over the years you've gotten from your family, right? If your family says, if you've got a stomach ache, just drink some Sprite, that'll cure the stomach ache, or all of these home remedies that you might hear about from your family or your friends or traditions. Are your family and your relatives really medical authorities, right? That might be hard for some people to process because it's their family, but I'm just saying you gotta think about who you have been depending on for so many years as a source of authority for just a variety of things, whether it's religion, politics, ethics, how to live your life, medicine, health, all sorts of things. So depending on somebody as an authority figure who's not really an authority in that area. Only real evidence proves a person's claims. And the false authority move swaps out evidence for badges, uniforms, popularity, big followings, or something like that. This is going to bleed into a variety of other fallacies like following the crowd, following the majority, following what's popular and things like that. But right now, we're just zeroing in on whether or not the person you're deferring to is actually an authority in the area. Why do we do stuff like this? The same reason we do all the others, because it saves our critical thinking. And, I have to be honest on this one that I do it and we all do it. And it's not a problem if the authority you're deferring to is actually an authority. But, we really do live in a time right now we have been living in a time like this out in the world where people have access to the internet. You see big podcasters like you may have heard of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan will be talking about something, whether it's medicine or some current event. And then he has an assistant named Jamie who he'll say, hey, Jamie, look that up. And Jamie will look that stuff up on the internet to verify whether or not what Joe is saying is accurate or not. This is a good practice. And most of the major people on podcasts have this sort of thing going on where there's an assistant verifying the things that they're saying in real time. In other words, because of the internet, the podcasters recognize that we can get up-to-date authoritative information on a subject, pretty much immediately by searching the web. However, understanding how to analyze the information we get from the web can be tricky business. And now with AI, it's even trickier. I'm using AI for a lot of stuff, but I have to constantly make sure that I'm asking it to give me its sources and information, and that it's not what they call hallucinating or giving me made up information, So the fact that I'm already very familiar with things like philosophy helped me to read things in AI and understand it. Anyway, all that to say, we live in an age where critical thinking is even more important on our part because of things like AI and the internet, not less important, right? Another reason that we do this is because we trust familiar faces. We trust celebrities. We trust, people on the internet. We trust political authorities. We trust religious figures. We trust our parents. It's easy for us to fall into the trap of listening to them in areas where they are not, in fact, an authority. We also get sucked into peer pressure for this sort of thing. If everybody just believes it, then you feel like you should probably believe it too. That if you don't believe it, then there's something wrong with you when everybody else does. Well, the problem is that people can be an authority in one field and be completely clueless about another field, right? So Michael Jordan is awesome in basketball. That doesn't mean he can teach us about climate change or, rocket science. So Justin Timberlake may be a great singer, but that doesn't mean he can tell us a whole lot about politics. But you see this sort of thing all the time where they get celebrities to come out and talk about their personal political or religious views, but they're not actually an authority in any of those things. Now we see this sort of thing in prison all the time with, again, the kind of diets that people make up using commissary food, or the kind of home remedies that people make up using commissary stuff, or things that they got from the medical clinic. You might have somebody in there who was an EMT before he got locked up, or was some kind of a doctor before he got locked up, and so they come in there and they make all sorts of pronouncements about workout regimens, diets, health routines. But the fact that they were an EMT or a doctor of some sort doesn't necessarily mean that they are an authority on all things related to health, right? You see somebody who made parole on their first time up for parole, and they wrote their own parole packet. They didn't hire a lawyer. And so then people are like, see, you don't need to hire a lawyer because so-and-so did this on his own. And look, he's teaching us how to do it now too. That may or may not be a really good bet. I did my own parole packet, and I studied and put things together for several years, and I made my first parole. Whether that was a result of a great parole packet or something else, I have no idea. Right? But I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't ask people or expect people to look to me for that kind of information, which is why you haven't seen me say stuff like that on here. I don't give legal advice. Same thing with fitness gurus on the cell block. There's a lot of people who look jacked, ripped, and they have a certain workout regimen. And so you assume that if you do what they do, then you'll look like that. And that's not necessarily the case at all, right? The questions we need to be asking about people who make pronouncements in all sorts of areas in the world, whether it's health and fitness or science, politics, and religion, is, do they have legit training in the field? Do they have some sort of credentials that give them authority in the area? Do other experts in the field agree? Right? Because sometimes you can have somebody who does have good credentials, but they're the only one saying this particular thing. We saw a lot of this during COVID. We see a lot of it now with various health issues, or even the prospects of whether or not AI will ultimately be a good or a bad thing for humanity. So they might have credentials, but do a bunch of other people agree with them or not? Right? And even an actual expert should still be able to show you the data or evidence. One of the things that sets them apart as an authority or an expert is that they can explain and interpret the data in a way that you can't, right? So even a real expert should have some sort of evidence or data outside of themselves to verify the things that they are saying. So the way you respond to this sort of a thing when people are deferring to authorities is asking questions that get to whether or not that person is in fact an authority, right? Or looking to other external sources like a dictionary or a medical text to verify information. And depending on your situation in prison, you don't have access to a lot of information, but that's the best you can do, in that situation, in that circumstance. So just keep in mind that credibility is context. People can be an authority in one area. That doesn't mean they have much to say in another area. Their authority doesn't translate from one to the other.